We'd like to welcome you to today's webinar hosted by the Current Consulting Group and Recovery Track. Again, I'm Jessica Polk of the Current Consulting Group, and I'll be conducting today's presentation entitled Overcoming Drug Testing Challenges with Telehealth Collections. Today's presenters are Kirk Caesarly from Recovery Track and Bill Current from the Current Consulting Group. Kirk is the Chief Executive Officer at Recovery Track with 20 years of experience and proven excellence in information technology and technical management. His extensive experience serving federal, state, local governments, and healthcare industries has prepared him to find numerous successful testing programs and proprietary application under his belt. Kirk has perfected his ability to customize and design solutions for each and every customer. Bill Current is the author of Why Drug Testing, Updated and Expanded for 2020, as well as 9 other books on substance-related issues. He founded the Current Consulting Group in 1998, and it has become the #1 recognized brand name in compliance, business development, and operations consulting in the drug testing industry. He created Current Compliance, the most up-to-date and comprehensive online subscription database on all state laws related to workplace drug testing, including marijuana and workers' compensation laws. And we'd like to go ahead and turn the virtual microphone over to Bill to go ahead and get us going.
Okay, well, thank you very much, Jessica, and welcome everyone to today's webinar Q&A series. I'm really excited today to be talking with Kirk Caesarly from Recovery Track, but also from Proof. We're going to get into all of the things that they do there. But I thought I would just tell you that Current Consulting Group, we've been in business a long time. We're actually clients of Recovery Track. And so we interact with and work with Kirk and his team on a regular basis. So I'm really excited about today's presentation. And it's sort of a lead in to what we're going to talk about today, telehealth collections. I thought I'd share some interesting statistics with you as we sort of kind of start to get used to the new normal, if you will. I realize that we're still battling with the pandemic in some ways, and the economy is starting to rebound, and unemployment, though up and down, is certainly down quite a bit from last year. But we're sort of heading in a new direction in many respects. I found this survey conducted last year by Growmotely on working from home, remote workplaces. And look at those 3 bullets there. 74% of professionals and 76% of entrepreneurs expect remote work to become standard. 97% of employees don't want to return to the office full time, and 61% of employees prefer being fully remote. You hear about these hybrid programs where you're working part-time at home and part-time in the office. 61% would prefer to just work remotely all the time. And then in another survey, Upwork's 2020 Future Workforce Pulse Report estimated that about 1 in 4 Americans, 26.7%, will be working remotely in 2021. And 36.2 million Americans will be fully remote by 2025. Wow, that's way up from the 16.8 million compared to the pre-pandemic numbers. But there are some advantages, of course, to working from home. A lot of people report being more productive, showing greater loyalty to their employers, reduce missed work days, some costs go down, maybe a little bit of less stress on the part of the worker, but there are some drawbacks as well. For example, 1 in 3 Americans are more likely to drink alcohol during working hours when working from home. 36% of men, 26% of women. And overall alcohol consumption was up 14%, and heavy drinking was up 18.8%, according to one 2020 survey. In addition to that, 13% of Americans reported starting or increasing substance use as a way to cope with the stress related to the pandemic last year. This resulted or correlated with a spike in overdoses and overdose fatalities. And so we saw some very negative things come out of the pandemic, and people working from home where they were sort of in an isolated situation. Some good, some bad, increased substance abuse, less oversight. So the need for substance abuse testing, drug testing, alcohol testing, still exists, still very strong right now. But some people are still fearful of going to an occupational health clinic to provide a sample of urine, for example, which was a very common way that we did drug testing prior to the pandemic. According to one survey, 71% of respondents said they were fearful to visit a doctor's office during COVID-19. And a lot of that fear continues to exist throughout the country. 67% of Americans did use telehealth since COVID for the first time in many respects. And then look at that last bullet. Even though 63% were apprehensive about their first telehealth appointment, and I had my first telehealth appointment ever in 2020, 72% ultimately enjoyed the experience. So I fall into some of these statistics that you see on the screen. I recently had a hospital stay and was a little bit concerned about the situation when I got to the hospital in terms of COVID safety. I'm glad to report the hospital I stayed in was excellent. But some people remain fearful about that, or at least concerned. I've had some good experience with telehealth appointments with doctors, taking care of minor things like the flu or a cold or something like that. Fortunately, when I had various symptoms, COVID-related symptoms, I tested negative. But people are still concerned about that. So we have this sort of fearful attitude that lingers from COVID about going to a doctor's office, going to an health clinic, going to sort of a traditional brick and mortar establishment where a urine collection might be take place, and apprehensive about meeting perhaps in a telehealth type of environment with a doctor or other healthcare provider, but the country becoming more used to that. And that sort of brings us to the whole concept of telehealth drug collections, sample collections for drug testing. So today, we're going to talk with Kirk Caesarly from Proof, part of Recovery Track, on telehealth collections, what they are, why they exist, how Proof itself exists and what Proof is, and then the benefits that employers can expect to see in using a telehealth collection program. Now, we know that a lot of people on today's webinar are actually from the drug testing industry. We did a little bit of research on this as part of our annual survey in 2020 that we conducted at the end of the year. Some of you know that every year at the Current Consulting Group, we do a survey of the drug testing industry, but we also surveyed employers. And we found that a fairly significant percentage, about 10%, said that they had clients inquiring about telehealth collections as an alternative to sending employees to an offsite collection facility. So it's something that is growing in interest among your end users and something that people in the industry are looking at seriously to see if it's an alternative that they want to offer to their client base. So with that, let's jump into this first segment. We're going to present today's questions in 3 segments. Why telehealth collections? And as I prepare to sort of turn the microphone over to Kirk, think about these questions here. And in this format, we want to invite you to ask questions. So if we're not covering something you want to cover, if you have specific questions for Kirk, just put them in the question or chat function or the question function, and we'll definitely get to them. But we're going to talk about what a telehealth collection is, what is Proof, how we came up with the idea for Proof in the first place, and how it's going to work as people sort of move out of the pandemic into sort of a post-pandemic environment. So Kirk, welcome to today's webinar.
Thank you, Bill. I appreciate it. I'm very proud and I'm enjoying the invitation to be here with you and the rest of the folks that are attending. And I look forward to talking about telehealth collections and specifically Proof. So I'll go ahead.
Get us started.
Yeah, I was gonna say I'll jump right in and give you my version of the telehealth collection definition, and I think it's very similar into what you described earlier in terms of a telehealth session for purposes maybe if you're having issues with your health and you can't get to a facility or you prefer not to go to a facility. And so a telehealth collection is essentially a similar type of process where rather than going into a collection site to provide a specimen, you could provide that specimen in the comfort of your own home, the safety, the security of your home, your office, a hotel room, wherever you deem it's necessary or possible for you. And to do that with assistance remotely and not have to go to a brick and mortar facility to do that. So in terms of convenience, makes things very easy for you. You don't have to worry about hours of operations. You don't have to travel. And if it is being done remotely, as I think, as you said, particularly when it came to visits with a physician or somebody to help you with your health conditions, you can do it in a very safe manner. You don't have to be in front of others that may be sick. And of course, I think the number one thing, like I said, is it's just safe and convenient for the individual that needs to provide that specimen. Proof is our answer to telehealth collections. We labeled the product Proof, Proof, just as you would think it would be spelled, primarily because one of the key things with providing the specimen for the purposes of a drug test is you need a lot of proof about that process. You need to know, number one, that the individual providing the specimen is in fact the donor you intended it to be. And you need to also know that the collection procedure happened properly and that all the steps that were involved actually did occur, so that when the specimen is received at a laboratory, that you can feel comfortable it is the right person that provided it, the collections happened the way that they were supposed to, so you can trust and believe in the lab analysis, the lab report that you're going to receive. So our process around doing a telehealth collection is essentially a capture of all the proof necessary to feel comfortable about that. The inspiration for us to develop Proof is really primarily due to our necessity as a business. Recovery Trek is a third-party administrator. We initially launched focusing on doing drug and alcohol testing for substance abuse treatment programs. However, we have moved into working with workplace type clients. That might be employers, other TPAs, individuals that need to do drug and alcohol testing for pre-employment purposes, randoms, maybe even reasonable suspicion. All of us together have the same difficulty when it comes to drug and alcohol testing, and that is getting a collection done when you need it, where you need it, and accurately. So having that same difficulty, working with many collection sites all over the country where we have customers, we looked for a better way. How could we bring the collection process to really the point where it's most necessary, and that is with the donor. So Proof was born. We came up with an idea of how to develop a mobile technology that the donor could interface with, which basically means being instructed on how to do a collection themselves, how to follow each and every step and do it properly. But we also needed to come up with a way for the individual to be observed, and so that we couldn't just trust them to do it 100% on their own. And confirm that they themselves are the only one providing the specimen, not to adulterate or manipulate the process anyway. So part of our technology that we developed was also to observe, record, and verify that the individual is in fact who we needed it to be. Proof being a mobile platform, a mobile technology that is available on a smartphone through the iOS Apple App Store or the Google Android Play Store, is something that's installed on an individual smartphone. We are working, by the way, on a mobile browser version, so that you may not, if you may not have a smartphone, you could still use Proof through a browser on a desktop or a laptop, assuming and confirming, of course, prior to starting that you would have video recording capabilities, meaning that hardware has a camera, and that it has audio recording capabilities, meaning that it has a microphone, as well as having speakers so that you can hear the instructions, because that's a real key part of how the Proof platform works. And as it is guiding the individuals through how to do a collections, they are reading those instructions and hearing those. But our app is self-guided, if you will. And so it differs from a platform like what we're doing today, a mobile meeting platform like WebEx or Zoom or Skype, where some individuals are using those to do telehealth sessions. They have also used those to do telehealth collections. So Proof is very different in that it is not a live session with one individual on another end, such as a collector guiding a donor on the opposite end. Instead, our technology does all of that guidance, does all of that recording, and does all of that verification for us. And so the key point as to why we developed it the way that we did, different from a video platform, is so that we only have one person's schedule to worry about, that being the donor. Because that, if anyone has ever been involved in scheduling collections, that's one of the biggest difficulties, is scheduling a collection site to have the proper staff, the proper trained collectors available when your donor needs to provide their specimen. So removing that element out of the process has really given Proof a flexibility level that no other solution has been able to also address. And it also is important in terms of scalability. Because Proof is self-guided, it resides on the person's smartphone. They start to test the collection when it works for them at whatever time of day it is. We actually can do thousands upon thousands of collections at the same time that a single live collector could do one. And in terms of trying to scale with a live collector to meet the same capabilities that we have, it's just not attainable. So that's also why we chose to go the route that we did, because it allows us to scale. It gives us unlimited flexibility and convenience. And it also, ultimately, at the end, allows us to provide a more complete product at a much better price and value. Proof, as I mentioned, was really developed and created prior to the pandemic, and we had been working on the platform for a couple years, actually. We filed for a patent when we first developed this, received that patent in the late summer of 2019, and had been piloting the platform for many months with several of our own customers. And in January of 2020, we had set the goal to launch August of 2020 with Proof Live, available to all our customers and anyone else in the world, for that matter, that wanted to work with the platform or work with us as a partner. As everybody knows, the pandemic really got heated up, and the March and April timeframe of 2020, about 5 months prior to when we were scheduled to go live, but we couldn't wait. So we fast-tracked our delivery of the product to the market and launched on April 1st. Kind of April Fool's Day in some ways, but actually it was a great day for us, and that we were able to continue services for our customers by being able to provide collections remotely, safely, securely, where many others were not able to do specimen collections and drug testing because the world was shutting down and facilities were closing. And even those that were left open were either doing COVID tests, which is a place many healthy people at the time may not want to go if they didn't have to, just to provide a specimen, or the facility just was not available at all, was just also closing like the rest of the world. So this really helped us in multiple ways. It, of course, fast-tracked our launch, the pandemic did, that is, but it also helped alleviate some of the questions and the concerns that people may have had thinking about doing drug testing and specimen collections in other ways besides the traditional in-facility, brick-and-mortar live collector. So in many ways, although it was unfortunate for a lot of folks in the world, it actually has been very fortunate for us in terms of being able to provide a new way and a more secure way and a more simplified way and a more accurate way of delivering specimen collections. So we're going to jump now into some screens here and some questions and discussions just around how Proof works. Proof, as I mentioned, starts out basically with a free download for any individual that needs the application or needs to be able to provide a specimen collection. So they launch this on their smartphone. And at the same time that is happening, we're going to kind of assume that the person that needs to collect is already part of one of our partnerships with either a TPA, an employer, or treatment program, whomever it is that might have individuals that need to test. So at the same time they would have been set up and a test would have been scheduled, the individual donor, the participant of a program, would have received that notice that it's time to download the app, time to log into the system and get going, all at the same time while their supplies, their proof pack or their proof supplies are being shipped and delivered to them wherever they have requested them, at home, at office, on travel, whatever it might be. When they receive those supplies, that supply pack will actually have the device or the kit and all the other details that they will need in order to perform a collection and interface with the Proof app. In terms of sample types or specimen types that Proof can interface with, it primarily, number one, our specimen of choice is oral fluid. We also do have options to do fingernail collections, dried blood spots, and there's a few others that are coming very soon that we'll be announcing as we deploy more. But the primary sample is oral fluid, and there's some reasons for that. Number one, it's by nature very easy to observe, and it's very easy for an individual person to do it on their own. If anyone's familiar with oral fluid collections, it's fairly simple, basically taking a swab out of a tamper-sealed package, swab in your mouth, placing it into a vial that has a buffer solution for transporting it, packaging it up properly so that the lab can accept it and so it's safe in transit, and then shipping it off to the laboratory for analysis. But from start to finish, as I mentioned, basically the way that it would work is once the individual's been set up to test, the scheduled date is on the calendar, supplies have arrived, they will interface with the app by logging into it, and the app will do one critical step from the very beginning, and that's to identify who they are. Our app will do a valid government ID scan that can include driver's license, passports, international passports, and international driver's license as well, and scan that ID for all the information that's on it so that we can tell that it is an actual real ID. And then we also get the photo that's off of that ID. And that's important because our second step is to do what we call a liveness scan. Through facial recognition, the app will check the donor that's on screen, compare it to the ID, and assuming the match is good, we move on to our next step, which is to open our Proof packaging, which is all tamper sealed. And those tamper seals are important because if you do have individuals that need to collect multiple times, say of some quick frequency, multiple times in a month, for example, maybe that's in a treatment program, or if it's a random employment program, then we can send multiple Proof packs at one time so that they always have supplies on hand. And again, they're tamper sealed, and they only open those seals, the donor that is, when the app instructs them to and when the recording of the process begins. And that happens immediately after we verify the identity. And so the app will walk through each of the steps based on the kit that's included in the pack. So if it's an oral fluid kit, for example, the app will instruct the donor when to open the packaging, how to remove the swab from the first time, which end to hold, which is very important, how to place it in their mouth. Because of most oral fluid devices, it requires about 3 minutes of time in a person's mouth to absorb enough saliva, enough oral fluid. The app will actually time them and tell them when that 3-minute time limit is up so that they don't have to think about it. They don't have to look at their watch. They can just sit there comfortably relaxed and let the app continue to guide them. Once that is done, that timer is up. As I mentioned earlier, they'll place the swab into a buffer solution in a vial for transport. They'll seal it with a specimen vial seal, which is required on all drug test collections, no matter what type of specimen type you're using. And then they'll actually sign any documentation that's necessary. If there is chain of custody that's required, that's included in the Proof pack. If we are able to interface and use electronic chain of custodies where we transfer that information that would normally come on that document, we are doing that today. But the individual does do an initials, adds their initials, to the specimen vial seal. And then they are instructed on how to place that vial into a specimen bag, a sealed, clear specimen bag that then goes into a clinical pack with our carrier of choice, either FedEx, USPS, or UPS. And then that is delivered to the laboratory through typically overnight next day services. One step that I didn't mention that's just prior to packaging that up and sealing the FedEx pack is to scan the barcode of the vial and the barcode of the FedEx or the carrier's shipping label. And this is important because one of the very critical features of Proof is to provide tracking that is not available with brick and mortar or in-facility collections. In addition to being able to tell you, the testing entity, when your pack arrives to your donor's location, when they start the test, when they finish it, we also can capture and know the specimen ID that was of the specimen that was collected. And we have that information at the time of service ready to deliver to the laboratory so they know what to expect. And we can start tracking that package going to the laboratory as well as soon as they scan that barcode. So all of those are real critical steps and real critical features of the process and the platform that Proof provides.
So Kirk, let me jump in and ask a question. You know, I'm thinking of myself going through the testing process with Proof. What if I just get completely stuck and I'm not sure what to do next, or you're just dealing with somebody who's not very tech savvy? What happens in that situation?
So we have multiple things put in place to help address that prior to that occurring, and I think that's what's really important. So I mentioned a welcome to Proof email when someone is first set up for their test. They will receive that. That includes their login details, how to access the app, but it also includes sample videos on how Proof works, how an actual collection should look, what the ideal situation is in terms of going from start to finish, so that we alleviate any anxiety in working with the platform and working and doing the collection on your own, and increase accuracy so they know, again, what to expect and how to perform that. If there are issues in the middle of the process, typically it's fairly recoverable. It's not very difficult to actually go through the collections regardless of the specimen type. But if there is something that occurs, one thing that we do with Proof, with collections as they are completed, is we do review these for accuracy. So although the app has many automated features, we also incorporate a review process so that we can determine if there has been any adulteration, manipulation on the individual's part, knowingly or unknowingly. If they made a mistake by chance, we can check to see if that is recoverable or not. And if not, we're able to notify the lab in advance so that we can stop the the testing process, so that we don't incur more expense for the testing entity, whoever that may be, and so that we can follow a protocol that the customer would like. That may be providing another Proof pack to do a second collection. It may be to determine there's a different way that we need to go about the collection procedure if Proof is not going to work for that individual. But as you mentioned, some folks just may not either be able to work with some technology, or they may have some other reasons as to why Proof may not work for them right away. So we've addressed that with coming up with a multilingual option for Proof. So we do have Spanish versions and have plans to work on other languages available. And then we do have folks that may not be able to actually use the use of their hands or arms and can't work with the technology or even the collection devices, or they may be elderly and still need to get a test done, but can't do it completely on their own. So we have a version that is referred to as our caregiver version of Proof, in which a second individual can be with them at the point of service, and they can help them guide and be guided through the process as Proof instructs both individuals. One quick thing to note that I didn't mention earlier about the process is the time that it takes. And I think this is also another exciting thing as to why Proof has been such a success. It takes about 15 minutes or less for the average person to run through a collection from start to finish. And if most of you are familiar with doing a collection at a brick and mortar facility, if you can just sit in the waiting room for only 15 minutes before it's your time to do your collection, then you're lucky. And that's not including, of course, any drive time to the site or drive time back home or back to your office. So in terms of saving time, Proof is really the best option as well. And being able to do that when it fits for your schedule, after you're home from work, after the kids are in bed, dinner's made, etc., and everything's quiet at 9 o'clock at night, you can do your collection with ease.
Now, what about somebody who's thinking, I'm here, my employer or prospective employer is there, we're not even in the same state, I could probably figure out a way to cheat on this. In other words, I'll give somebody else's saliva for my test. I mean, how do we get around the possibility of somebody trying to cheat using proof?
So the number one thing that we start out with is the ID verification and validation step, as I mentioned. So from the very beginning, we know who it is that we should be expecting to receive the specimen from. Once that is completed and they go through the process of each of the collection steps, they are recorded the entire time and they are on screen, and the app actually has technology built in that allows us to know and to be automatically notified, I should say, if that person goes off screen, if they leave the clear workspace area that we refer to that you need to have set up when you're doing your collection. Because as the app is reviewing or viewing every step that occurs, we need to be able to see that individual's hands, of course their head and their upper body, if you will, and the workstation where all of the supplies are being laid out. So within that process, or at the end of the collection, as we receive the collection video, what I refer to as the proof assets, and we do our review of that procedure, those steps that the individual went through. If anything occurs that is not acceptable or that would invalidate the process, very similar to what you would do in a brick and mortar facility, when we review that, we produce what we call a proof card that goes to the testing entity to tell them that it was valid or invalid. And if it was invalid, we say exactly why. And it may not be that an individual is trying to manipulate the test on purpose, trying to cheat, but instead they just made a mistake. They dropped the device out of their mouth using an oral fluid collection kit as an example, and just reached down to pick it up. That's obviously not good. You can't use the 5-second rule like we do with our kids. If they drop a chip or something, that needs to be invalidated because that could be contaminated, and so we couldn't trust those results. But those steps are all, or those activities are all reviewed and captured and documented as we review the collections when they come into our servers. Real quick note on that review process, we actually do that review within our service level agreement is under 24 hours, and in most situations it's under 4 hours. So the important factor there is that we have the information much quicker than you ever do know if something is invalidated or there's issues in a brick and mortar scenario, because you don't typically know that until a specimen is received at a laboratory, which is typically well over 24 hours, and whatever time it takes for that lab to accession it. We can tell the testing entity those types of issues much, much earlier in the process, so that we have time to take additional actions, whatever those might be, whatever the customer, the testing entity has determined is best for them.
So overall, a client can expect to get a drug test result just as fast as any other collection process.
Absolutely. And in fact, we can actually tell you that the collection occurred much quicker than any other method. But in terms of turnaround time, interfacing with our lab partners, it is as good or better than what you would see today in terms of turnaround time for your lab reporting. Absolutely.
Okay. So let's talk about the benefits for employers. And again, we invite our audience to submit their questions. Let us know if now we're going to get into some real practical things now in the application in sort of the real world. So submit your questions and we'll be prepared to answer those. Let's go through these questions now, Kirk.
Yeah, so absolutely, there's plenty of benefits. I think, as you mentioned earlier, Bill, one of the key things right now with the hiring market that we have in the country today, it's difficult to get folks hired. And a lot of that has to do with speed in terms of being able to make decisions and move forward on an applicant. Proof, of course, allows you to move much faster. There's less time that you need to take to scheduling. Proof packs can be delivered to candidates or applicants overnight, 2-day, or be delivered to a testing entity and employer in bulk, and they can hand these out as they see fit. But being able to get someone to collection very quickly and know that it occurred properly and accurately and get your results even quicker. That allows just number one, a return on the investment in terms of being able to just make those hiring decisions very fast rather than taking longer times and that individual finding other offers and other opportunities with employers that may not be incorporating a drug-free workplace policy in their process of hiring. So of course, that's number one. Our cost and the overall expense with Proof is right in line with what I would say is traditional testing that most folks think about, i.e. urine testing today. So we see a pretty much apples for apples, if you will, in terms of the cost. And so again, in being able to make decisions quick, keeping your staff safe, also, if it is being done in a situation where it is randoms, not needing to or requiring individuals to leave either the office to go to a collection site, taking time away from work, putting them in potential harm's way, they can do this on their time at home when it's convenient, or if they are remote workers, do it where their office essentially is, and again, not have to leave and not have to take time off from work to get it done. So that benefits both the employer and it also benefits the employee. So I kind of mentioned that, that's one of the major benefits, of course, is not sending and needing to send any of your applicants, your donors, your employees to health centers. Just saves a lot of time in terms of being off the job, not being at work, if you will. The drive time involved, and of course the health concerns of being in those facilities. At least right now with the pandemic, but we never know what could be the next thing that's around the corner. And just in general, it's much healthier if you can be at home or if you can be doing this in a remote location. So of course, that's a huge benefit to both parties, the individual employee and the employer. We can, of course, use this, as I mentioned, a couple examples or reasons for test. Of course, pre-employment is one of the first ones we think about. As Bill mentioned, we are looking at more and more of a virtual work environment where people are not only were asked or required to work from home because of the pandemic, but are able to continue to work from home. But now we're hiring people remotely and able to keep them at a remote office. And that being probably something that is going to continue well into the future, Proof is a perfect companion to that, so that you don't have to think about scheduling and locating collection sites in areas around the country where your offices, your headquarters may not exist, or you don't have good boots on the ground there to be able to help you identify those locations. So Proof is perfect in that it goes direct to wherever they are, and you, the testing entity, the TPA, the employer, et cetera, don't have to worry about that coordination at all. We do offer this, of course, for random testing. Post-accident reasonable suspicion is also an option. Now, in that scenario, we do have several partners that are using it for reasonable suspicion, and they receive Proof packs in advance, all tamper sealed, ready to go, and they can deliver those to the individual or have them do that test in a safe area wherever that reasonable suspicion test needs to be. Rather than asking them to drive off site to go to a collection facility to provide a specimen, or to have a supervisor take them to a facility, of course, Proof reduces a lot of the risk by doing that, and it increases the time in which you get the collection done. So those are very key factors, of course, as most folks know when it comes to a reasonable suspicion test requirement.
So Kirk, let me throw a question out there then. So let's say, and this kind of came up with a client recently, they've been having trouble finding somebody to work for the company, the right person. They found another person. They found the right person. They number one choice by far. The only challenge is this person lives in another state, and it wasn't any problem doing the interviewing because they just did that with, with Zoom or some other video platform. But the company policy requires a pre-employment drug test. So the company's in, state A, the applicant's in state Z. how do you connect them with proof? I mean, what they've decided they want to do the drug test. So what's the process in that situation, and how long is it going to take to get the packet to that person over in on the other side of the country?
Literally, it could be less than 24 hours or even quicker if that's the requirement, or if that's what the testing entity, the company, would like to have in terms of turnaround. It can be as simple as that representative from the hiring team logging into the proof portal or one of our channel partners and accessing it through their interface, which we do deploy a proof portal, a customized option for any of our partners or direct customers for that matter. They can log into the proof portal, create an order for an applicant in your example, choose the type of test that they would like: oral fluid, pre-employment, standard panels, 5-panel, 10-panel, whatever it is that they may want or need, and then choose their turnaround time in terms of delivery to the individual: next day, 2-day. But in the scenario we need to get it there fast, right away, they would choose next day, click save, and our proof order processing team would receive those orders and have that package and delivered to that individual, dropped in FedEx at our site and delivered to that individual by the next morning. And so theoretically, they would be able to collect with the day that they received it within hours, and they could turn around it as well and put it into the FedEx hands via a FedEx Dropbox, which is safe and secure and available for oral fluid collections, by the way. Not so much typically for a urine test. You wouldn't want to do that, so that's another big advantage here. Or they can schedule a FedEx pickup. So literally within 24 hours, they could receive their proof pack wherever they are in the country, do their collection, and have it back in the FedEx system en route to the laboratory, which should help in terms of those real world scenarios that you mentioned in terms of trying to be able to hire folks very quickly and not let them get away before another offer hits their desk.
Okay, so let me give you another one. See if I can make it a little harder for you this time.
Sure.
Let's say I'm a drug testing provider, I'm a TPA, and I've got a lot of construction companies that are clients, and they're just all over the place, of course. You know, let's say we're based in Fort Lauderdale, but I've got crews working in South Georgia, in Alabama, north part of Florida, etc. And let's say I've got like a crew of 50 people working out of Jacksonville, so the other end of the state from where we're headquartered, but they're there working full time. You know, they never come to Fort Lauderdale. But construction sites can be safety sensitive workplaces, of course they are. And so our company policy not only includes pre-employment testing, post-accident reasonable suspicion. I've got this crew of 50 people, you know, 6-7 hours from the home office, and an accident occurs. Now what do I do? How can I use proof to make sure that I get that test done?
So in that example, and we have real customers today that use proof in the reasonable suspicion testing scenario, and that is to have a certain quantity or certain supply of sealed proof packs ready to go on hand and available at any location that they may have. So in your example, you know, at a staff level of 50, we may work with the client to determine the appropriate amount of inventory or proof supplies to have on hand. Maybe it's 5 packs, maybe it's 10, depending on not just reasonable suspicion opportunities or potential that we think may come up. Look back on their history and see what it's been like over the course of time, 1 a quarter, or whatever the number might be, but also what their hiring frequency is looking like, or if they do know they're going to have a hiring event coming up and they want to be able to hand those out rather than have them delivered on demand, then we will package what we would call a proof pack in bulk and deliver that appropriate amount, all individually tamper sealed, all ready to be opened at the time that the collection needs to occur, so that there's no delay in terms of getting the supplies to the group that needs them because of that reasonable suspicion or post-accident occurrence. The lifespan, if you will, or the expiration of the supplies is over 12 months. So that's also why we want to be kind of cognitive of the amount that they may need to use and not order too much, order too little. But we have a lot of flexibility in that the collection devices and the supplies included have a pretty good shelf life. And so more than likely, if we do it within good reason in terms of trying to supply up, we're probably going to get pretty close to it, and there's not going to be excess inventory.
Okay, so all of that sort of answers our last question, which is, how does proof make drug testing possible? I guess in this sort of new normal that we're in, where companies may face challenges getting sort of traditional collections conducted at brick and mortar locations, proof gives them an option so that they can work around those, whether it's a remote workplace or hiring an applicant on the other side of the country, or just any scenario in which it's just not feasible, or maybe for some people not comfortable going to an offsite collection facility. Sounds like you cover those areas completely.
Absolutely. Number one, when the pandemic was hitting, of course, no one could really easily have their testing programs continue if the collection site is just unavailable, it's closed, or if it was taking priority to do COVID-19 testing or to see patients that may have symptoms and need care. So that by far allowed us as a company ourselves, real world, to be able to continue business and continue services for our customers. But the pandemic may not be the only scenario, as you noted. We have many customers that have donors and participants that need to test in very rural areas. So to ask them to drive 25 miles, 50 miles, and not know with 100% confidence that when they show up at that site, it's going to be open, they will have the supplies they need, or the collector on site knows what to do when they get there. So being able to address those scenarios and be able to continue testing, no matter what's been thrown at us, so far we have been very happy and delighted that Proof has addressed all of those and allowed us to continue business when many folks were not able to. In fact, the mass majority were not. To date, we've done over 20,000. Our average time, as I mentioned, is somewhere around the 15-16 minute mark. But I think it's also kind of neat to note that when we have customers that we see doing repeated collections with the same donors, they do a second test, a third test, they're able to get their collection time down to about 10 or 12 minutes, which is pretty incredible, again, for being able to get this process done in such a short amount of time. That's just not the way that it works in a brick and mortar facility. So we've been very happy to see that. And I think it's also neat to note that our success rate with collections is over 99%. And the way that we come up with that number is looking at and determining, as I mentioned, when we review each of the collections, whether that collection was performed properly, the ID matched, the steps were followed, there was no manipulation, it did arrive at the lab, we did receive results. 99% of the time we're able to say that that happened without a hitch. And again, in my time in the business, I have yet to be able to have that kind of success rate with a traditional collection site network. It's just very difficult to be able to do that. But we've been able to do that with the platform primarily because of its ease of use and how we deploy it. And one quick note about that is if we do see issues that occur, we're able to address those fairly quickly, and within hours we can update our process with the app so that the next people logging into it can actually see those updated instruction sets. And that's how we've been able to hone the process throughout the time that we've had it live.
Okay, Kirk, so that's great. We've got some questions that have been submitted and we're kind of running out of time. So let's get to a few of those questions real quick. And let the audience know that if we don't get to your question today, we'll respond to it still. We'll send you an email with an answer to your to your question. But here's one question that was submitted a couple of times. What happens, Kirk, if the facial recognition doesn't have a match? How often do you actually see this occur? Say for example, somebody had facial hair in their ID photo, but now they don't, or some other scenario, for example. How often does that happen? What occurs in that situation?
It in our experience with over 20,000 so far, it's in the very low single percentiles, around the 3% range, and that is in terms of the reasons for that. It could be an exact example like the person that asked the question gave. They looked one way in their ID, but a different way now when they actually are on screen. Our technology will do its best to make a match, and if it cannot, based on a certain probability that we have programmed it to, then it kicks that out as an outlier to us, and then our certified review team looks at that themselves, physically looks at it, and digs in to do their best determination, just like in an in-facility live collector would do when they review someone's ID when they're about to take a collection from them. So we would look at that separately and make a determination ourselves, not just rely solely on the facial recognition automation that we have, but do that real scan from our team. And then we would document that and provide that on the proof card that I mentioned, which is a very big differentiator, of course, also from a brick and mortar collection. You don't get a report telling you how the collection went, or if the ID was verified. You may see that on the chain, but that's often well after the fact. But our proof card would have that documented, and then would allow the testing entity to be able to make their determination on what they want to do. Approach the individual that was the donor. If it wasn't the match, they would have that data and they could address that with the person. Again, that happens very quickly after the collection occurs. So if the match is not good, we can stop the process and not analyze the specimen, so that we don't incur more expense and we don't create a scenario or situation that we don't want to have to continue with.
Okay.
But it's happened very little so far. Yep.
Okay, and another question is every video reviewed?
So the short answer is yes. We have a process that we have developed to certify our team. They have to go through, it's basically a 3-day course that they go through to be certified as a proof collection reviewer. There is technology that we have built in our review process that allows us to do it very quickly and accurately and effectively. The reviewers also go through their own proof collection. So not only are they fully trained on how a collection should occur, how it should be viewed, how the identity needs to be verified, all the various steps, etc., but they also do collections themselves so that they feel and experience exactly what the donors do.
Okay. And what about the DOT regulations? Can you use proof? Is proof DOT compliant, if you will?
Not yet. As probably many folks know, oral fluid is on the DOT docket, if you will. It's in review. I think there's a lot of expectation that it will be available soon. Oral fluid meaning being an acceptable specimen type and collection option. And then I think we strongly believe once that happens, it's an obvious, kind of next step or progression that a remote, secure telehealth collection like proof would be something that would follow that. But at this moment, not yet. But we believe there's high hopes for the future.
Okay. And I've done a little bit of research on this next question about non-DOT state laws. We haven't run into, at CCG, we haven't run into any state laws that would prevent the use of proof or telehealth collections. But what would you say to somebody, Kirk, if they want to do this, they want to provide this service to their clients, but they're wondering, well, how does my client handle this in terms of their policy? Where do we go from there?
Well, I think it's important, like you said, to dig in a little bit and just confirm that there aren't any issues. And as you said, along with you and with others, partners in terms of the oral fluid collection devices, the manufacturers of those, and the laboratories that provide the analysis, I think it's good to do consulting of your own and to confirm that. But I think it's also important to ensure that your policy or that the policy of your customers allows for oral fluid testing and/or remote telehealth collections. And of course, there's great folks out there like yourself, Bill, and your team that could help them with doing that. And as close of a partnership that we have, when those questions come up, we absolutely can work with the individuals and with you to make sure that they have the appropriate policy inclusions.
Thank you. And we're about out of time. And so again, folks, any questions we didn't get to, we'll make sure that we send you an email with a response to your question, or any other questions you come up with after the webinar today. But we're about out of time. So Kirk, any last comments that you want to make before we turn it back over to Jessica?
I guess I would just say thank you very much to you for helping us and hosting this with us. And thank you for everybody that did attend. And we look forward to seeing if we can talk with anybody about proof and how we can make it possible to either work with you as a customer, or if you have clients that you work with to provide drug testing programs, we'd love to see how we could partner with you to make that more efficient and help get telehealth collections and proof out to the masses. So thank you for the time.
Thank you very much, Kirk, and thank you everybody for attending. Let me turn it over to Jessica for the outro and any instructions that she has for you.
Thank you so much, Bill and Kirk, for that information and for that guidance over this technology. We'd like to thank those of you who joined us today for taking the time to come and learn with us. We hope you found that today's presentation was informative and helpful. This presentation was recorded and you will receive information on how to access that recording. Additionally, this presentation qualified for professional development credits from SHRM and from CCDAP for those who attended today's presentation in its entirety. So if you're still with us today and you're hearing this message, you qualified, and we will send you an email with those activity IDs. You don't need to do anything. We've got your name, we've got your email. We'll contact you with that information. Like Bill mentioned, if you come up with a question or you have more questions, Bill and Kirk would be happy to help you find those answers. So please feel free to reach out to us or to Kirk. That information is posted on the screen. And with that, we thank you for your attendance today, and this concludes today's webinar. Have a nice day.